Like shellfish and
Sure,
crustaceans
shellfish and kelp and all the invertebrates that are available in the tide pools.
The ransacking of the Chapman's house suggests Sasquatch has an appetite for fish. If so, it wouldn't be the only primate to eat seafood. Several species of monkeys eat mollusks they find in shallow water. But Sasquatch are frequently seen far inland at much higher altitudes. Surviving here would require Sasquatch to live on hard-to-process foodstuffs, like sedge grass, leaves, even bark. This in turn would require a specially adapted gut.
A very long gut with a long passage time allows them to process coarser food items, leaves and so forth, that would be unavailable to many other animals that inhabit the western United States. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever.
But do sightings of Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest match up with the best food zones for a large omnivorous ape? Using the global map, the team compares sightings with the best possible habitats. They match up almost perfectly.
Well, there's a lot of links between altitude, precipitation, and temperature, and also with vegetation. So if you get more rain, you tend to get more vegetation. So we're seeing them in the northwestern rainforest.
The whole team agrees that a giant omnivorous ape could survive in the Pacific Northwest. But they need to consider a crucial question. How did a giant ape get to North America? Seeking answers, they look to Asia and sightings of another famous unknown creature, the Yeti. Searching for evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists has been exploring the Pacific Northwest. They found an ideal habitat for an omnivorous great ape. Now they investigate reports of similar creatures in Asia, searching for links between them and an answer to how Bigfoot got to North America. Their first Asian location, the mighty Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world. It's home to what local peoples know and fear as the Yeti. From our global map, our experts can see a tight cluster of sightings at altitudes over 9,000 feet above sea level, with an annual snow and rainfall of 40 inches. The most important evidence for Yeti is footprints. In 1951, climber Eric Shipton was at a height of 20,000 feet during an expedition to Mount Everest, when totally unexpectedly, he came across these ape-like giant prints. With no other humans living even remotely nearby, he was convinced they must have been genuine. Jeff Meldrum has a cast of the original Shipton footprint, and he's convinced it definitely came from a real creature.
It's quite distinctive in that the large toe is divergent from the remaining toes. A more thumb-like appendage. The Shipton footprint is further enigmatic in the fact that the second toe is quite enlarged. This may be a natural feature, or it could also be a pathology. We don't really know, since only a single footprint was documented.
It seems extremely unlikely that someone would add an injury to a faked footprint. And even more improbable that they would fake footprints on a remote snowfield more than 20,000 feet up in the Himalayas. The trouble is, this seems an unlikely habitat for a giant ape.
Primates are basically tropical animals. The sort of temperate, very cold areas that you see Yeti in are really very different from what you'd expect to see with a modern primate.
But there are exceptions. These Japanese macaques live at an altitude of over 10,000 feet and further north than any known primate. They've adapted to survive in temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Could Yeti have adapted to live in the same environment?
There are other primates that are adapted for high altitudes, and they have very huge home ranges.
I don't think Yetis live in the snowfields. I think they pass through the snowfields and they spend most of the time foraging in the forest where the food is. And on my one visit to Nepal, I was impressed by the number of food plants that were the same as mountain gorilla food plants.
Yeti's available diet and its footprints suggest it could be a creature closely related to a giant mountain gorilla. But locals say they have seen it tearing yaks and goats apart with claws. This seems impossible because apes don't have claws. Ian Redmond's experience on expedition suggests there may be a simple explanation.
I found the carcass of a wild goat, which had been eaten by a predator, and there were big cat prints nearby. But I would think that any intelligent hominid coming across a carcass killed by another predator would immediately avail himself of it.
Rather than kill yaks and goats itself, Yeti could be a scavenger. The team has little other evidence to go on. Tibetan and Nepalese monks treasure Yeti hairs and bones as sacred artifacts. Some samples have been analyzed for DNA, but so far, almost all have been identified as belonging to other known animals. But the Yeti isn't the only unknown giant creature in this isolated part of the world. Less than 300 miles from Mount Everest, in the mountainous jungles of the Garo Hills of northern India, there is a long history of sightings of an almost identical creature, called locally the Mande Barum.
Local people encounter them all the time. They see them in the forest. They say in general they're quite gentle, that they don't really harm you, but they're still extremely afraid of them.
Descriptions of the Mande Barum and the Yeti show such close similarities, team member Ian Redmond thinks they are the same species, just adapted to different environments.
I think of it as the lowland Yeti. It's not up in the snowfields, it's down in hot, steamy tropical forests of northern India.
Evidence for this lowland Yeti is even more difficult to track down.
It's actually very good luck to get a piece of it. And so by the time anybody goes to investigate it, villagers have come from miles around and ripped off a token. And it's almost like a relic, a little piece of a saint. You never see a whole body, but you occasionally see the scalp or you see a finger bone. And in fact, local ranger he had a finger bone, and he wanted to have it submitted for DNA analysis to see what it was. And he gave it to the Department of Wildlife, and they thought it would bring mockery to the department, and so it disappeared.
I think what this does, though, is highlight fear of ridicule, because anyone who's seen any of these things is likely to keep quiet about it because they'll be mocked.
1,000 miles east, in China, is what may be a third variety of Yeti. A creature the Chinese call the Yeren. In the mountainous forests of central China is a cluster of 200 sightings. But these are just reports from the last few decades. Legends of encounters with the Yeren, or wild man, date back to 200 BC. Yeren, Yeti, and Mande Barum, three almost identical Bigfoot-type creatures, all sighted within a few hundred miles of each other. The theory is they could all be linked and share the same ancestor, a giant ape that lived in Asia in the past. Remarkably, discovered only a few hundred miles south of these three clusters of sightings, is fossil evidence of a giant prehistoric ape. Called Gigantopithecus, for centuries its teeth were used as ingredients in Chinese medicine.
Gigantopithecus was first discovered by these molars that were being sold in Chinese apothecaries as dragon's teeth, and turned out to be big ape molars, and then a bit of mandible was found, I understand, and if you kind of put that together, it seems that it was a large gorilla-like ape.
It was using bone samples like this that team member Jack Rink, a specialist in fossil dating, worked out how long ago Gigantopithecus lived.
Well, to the best of our knowledge, Gigantopithecus's last known occurrence was about 300,000 years ago in southwest China. So that's your geographical and your temporal location for the last sighting in the fossil record.
This means Gigantopithecus was still alive at the time of our Stone Age ancestors.
There's almost no possibility that humans and Gigantopithecus did not encounter each other. So I really firmly believe that there has to have been interaction between these two primates.
The majority of the team believe that if the Yeti and Asia's other reported giant apes exist, they are almost certainly descendants of Gigantopithecus. But is the North American Sasquatch? Today, Asia and North America are separated by the Pacific Ocean. But many times over the last million years, a temporary land bridge has formed between Siberia and Alaska as sea levels have changed. It's possible a giant ape could have migrated across this precarious plateau of land into North America. But there's another creature that could also have made this journey. Now the team investigates evidence that sightings of Sasquatch might not be a giant ape, but a species much closer to man. One summer afternoon in 2007, Robert Wilson was driving in a heavily forested area on Vancouver Island. He didn't know it, but the area had a long history of Bigfoot sightings. Suddenly, he caught sight of something totally unexpected.
At a place called Maureen Creek, I'd just gone over the bridge when I saw through the trees what I thought was a bear. Slowed down and saw what I can only describe as a large, hairy man who looked caveman-like, if you wish, or sort of a Neanderthal features. As big as a bear, you know, easily. But it wasn't a bear, it had human features. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I could see very, very clearly.
Wilson's incredible sighting points to the possibility that Sasquatch may not be a giant ape at all, but could be some kind of prehistoric human. Our expert's global map reveals hundreds of sightings of giant Neanderthal-like humans all across Asia. The greatest concentration of these is in the Caucasus Mountains, south of Russia. These sightings became so numerous that over time the creatures were given a name. They are called Almas, or Almasti, meaning wild people. One of the most compelling and reliable of all the reports about the Almas was documented in 1925. General Mikhail Stepanovich Topilsky of the Russian Red Army attempted to surprise what he'd been informed were rebel soldiers hiding in a remote cave. The Russians could hear something moving inside. To their horror, the general and his men discovered they had gunned down not a modern enemy, but some sort of prehistoric human.
The dead creature lay with his eyes open and his teeth bared. In general, the hair was very thick, without any underfur. The knees were completely bare of hair, and there were callous growths on them. The color of the face was dark, The nose was flat, with a deeply sunken bridge.
Well, the eyewitness descriptions of the Almas, a heavily muscled body with a thick torso, deep-set eyes and heavy brows and very prominent cheekbones and thick jaws, could easily represent the Neanderthal.
But Neanderthals were only one of what we are now discovering to be a whole range of different types of early human.
One of the really interesting things about human evolution that we're now finding is that it's not a kind of evolutionary tree. It's more what we call an evolutionary bush. And there are lots of little side branches. There are lots of cousins of humanity that didn't go anywhere.
Evidence for other primitive human-type creatures has been increasing dramatically. In fact, fossil evidence of a human relative has been found on the island of Flores in Southeast Asia. And it shows that this creature was alive until recently. Unlike the Almasty, they are very small. But they too are a separate species from modern man. Scientists named the creature Homo floresiensis.
Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, is always described as an example of island dwarfism. So this is an animal that's found itself on an island with none of the normal competitors that we'd normally have. And there is no need for it to be big anymore. Nothing's going to eat it because there are no predators. And so the particular ecology it's in is favoring being small.
Fossils of this real-life hobbit date to 10,000 years ago. But locals on nearby Sumatra have long spoken of a legendary small forest man they call Orang Pendek. Could this be the same creature? Or perhaps an even more primitive subspecies? Anna Nakaris has worked extensively in Southeast Asia, where she has discovered new species of primates. She's convinced local people's stories of Orang Pendek are reliable and of a real creature.
Local people can be extremely reliable, and there is a lot to say in listening to the stories of the people that live in these remote places.
The thing that's so fascinating to me is the life that's been breathed into the legend, so to speak, by the recent discovery of the Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. You know, the prospect of a relic population of hominid or another type of primate might not be so far-fetched.
Incredibly, just as these local stories have proved Orang Pendek might have a basis in fact, so too, new evidence reveals what might be the remains of the real-life Almasty. In March 2010, an amazing new discovery was made on the borders of Russia and Kazakhstan, in the same region as the 1925 encounter. From just a single finger bone, scientists identified yet another type of human species. They're calling it the X-woman, or Homo denisova.
So we've got this X-woman that's just been identified just from a finger bone that we've extracted DNA from. And the DNA in this finger bone is sufficiently different from the DNA that we've extracted from other modern humans and from Neanderthals that we think it was probably from a completely different species. So in fact, having multiple species of humanity is probably the norm.
Scientists now think Homo denisova was a cousin of Homo floresiensis. Some of the team believe remnants of multiple species of humans could still be living today.
These days, we seem not to be able to imagine that we can be living side by side with another bipedal creature, whereas in fact we did for 1 million years. And that was only discovered for certain in the 1980s.
Exactly. Why would the present be the exception to the rule that has seemed to prevail for literally millions of years?
An astonishing new discovery in China may supply the team with another possible candidate in their search to explain Bigfoot. A giant ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Until recently, heidelbergensis was believed to have gone extinct more than 250,000 years ago. But according to Jeff Meldrum, these newly unearthed remains may completely rewrite these dates.
It's remarkable because the preliminary dates have been placed at about 12,000 years ago, which is extremely recent.
This find suggests Heidelbergensis was still alive in Asia when the first modern humans were migrating to North America. Like them, it could have crossed the land bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska. Next, the team examined if the North American Sasquatch could really be a type of primitive human. In their quest to find definitive evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists is examining the possibility that the creature may be a type of early human. They've been investigating a potential suspect called Homo heidelbergensis, a giant ancestor of Neanderthals, which could have crossed into North America from Asia. They turn to one of the earliest written records of an encounter with Bigfoot. Could it be the same creature? (1891). Herman Gilbert and his brother-in-law have come west to stake a claim for land. They're in Northern California, at the southern end of the Cascade Mountains. This is the same area where Roger Patterson will shoot his famous film of a giant ape-like creature 76 years later. But from all accounts, what they're about to witness may not be an ape, but some kind of human. Both men have already heard the local stories of the What Is It, a legendary local monster to be avoided at all costs. Herman discovers signs of it first, giant footprints. Bones and gore litter the area. The smell is overpowering. Then they spot the creature itself. A huge, hairy man, bathed in blood, beating its chest and wailing in anger. Like others who have seen it before them, Gilbert and his brother-in-law flee. This early story of Sasquatch clearly describes a Neanderthal-like man. One possible candidate for Bigfoot is an ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis was the biggest known ancient human. We have specimens a towering 6.5 feet tall, but there could easily be others that were much taller. But Jeff Meldrum thinks Sasquatch behavior is far too wild to be explained as that of a human.
In the case of Heidelbergensis, given its degree of sophistication, intelligence, cultural evolution, it seems unlikely that it would have simply abandoned all of those trappings of humanity to adopt an austere life in the wild.
But some of the team disagree and think it may be because it's an early human and has kept some of its human-like traits that we can't find it. It may still practice human rituals, like burying its dead.
Perhaps they bury them in unmarked graves. They don't just die and rot in the forest. There is some ceremony involved. That would account for not finding remains.
Maybe due to competition, these large-brained, intelligent human species are really doing their best to avoid humans. And so they've gone more or less into a cryptic behavior, operating at a time when we don't see them or in habitats we don't choose.
But sometimes our worlds do cross, as the Chapmans found out when their house was ransacked in 1941. It's likely Homo heidelbergensis could easily lift and smash a 300-pound barrel of fish. Fossils show Heidelbergensis had much thicker bones than a modern human.
Bone's expensive, so if you've got thick bones, then you're going to have fairly big muscles to operate these things. Thick bones, big muscles, and therefore you were stronger.
This stronger frame and muscles could also explain how the creatures have regularly been reported to run at speeds of 30 miles per hour.
Sprinters, it's all about power. It's all about having kind of a bigger engine. So that's sort of more muscle for your weight. Perhaps they were built for sprinting.
Today's fastest sprinters average 6.3 feet tall and run at 27 miles per hour. A super strong 6'5" Heidelbergensis could easily be faster. And that's not all. Native American stories of Sasquatch describe hairy, rock-throwing men, which closely match the description of Heidelbergensis. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest also report the Sasquatch's attraction to human women. These stories stretch back centuries, but even today, they remain protective of women when they believe Bigfoot is at large.
When non-tribal people visit those locations where they take special care and they escort the females back to their vehicles and make sure that they are safely off the reservation. And I've personally been escorted off a reservation because they believed that there was a Bigfoot in the location.
One woman who says she knows what it's like to be pursued by a Sasquatch is Cindy Dosen. In April 2008, she was out in the forest around Maple Mountain, Vancouver Island, when an unidentified giant creature pursued her.
It was in the bush, breaking limbs and smashing trees, about 2 steps behind me.
She fled for her life.
This thing screaming and hollering at me, I need to hide, get out of the way. Like it was hurting me or pushing me along.
The creature chased Cindy several hundred yards until she reached the safety of her 4x4 and sped off.
And when I got into my car, I started crying. I just fell apart. And I wouldn't go back out in the woods for up to 3 weeks. I just would not. There's just no way.
Was this a close encounter with a lone male Sasquatch searching for a mate? Some First Nation legends go as far to say Sasquatch had children by human women.
There is oral tradition that it's happened in the past. They do talk about that offspring have been produced and the child will only usually live a very short period of time due to rapid growth. It's usually very slow, can't learn the language, doesn't learn any traditions.
But if Sasquatch really is a Heidelbergensis, mating with a human might not be as far-fetched as you might think. Recent genetic research has revealed early modern humans mated successfully with Neanderthals. Many people today still carry Neanderthal genes. The team has assessed a body of evidence that supports the idea that Sasquatch could be an ancient human. Height, strength, speed, even sexual attraction all make more sense if Sasquatch is a type of oversized Heidelbergensis. But Professor Jack Rink is about to propose a dramatic, never-before-revealed theory that suggests Bigfoot isn't an ancient species, but a type of modern human that has transformed itself into a creature of the wild. Our scientists believe there are most likely 2 explanations for Bigfoot, if it exists. The first is that it's a giant ape descended from a prehistoric creature called Gigantopithecus. The second, it's an unidentified species of ancient human, possibly a Homo heidelbergensis. But now the team investigates a third possibility, a new theory that focuses on the Pacific Northwest. Could sightings of Sasquatch be explained not by giant apes or prehistoric men, but by modern-day humans? Based on research into the Native American Squamish Nation, Jack Rink has learned of the secretive training rituals that must be undertaken by the tribe's shamans.
One of the aspects of the Squamish Nation oral tradition is that people become literally wild people through shamanic processes where they have to go off and stay isolated for periods of over 10 years, eating wild foods, being isolated from the other parts of their tribe. So the living wild people apparently do exist.
The clues that helped reveal this groundbreaking evidence were uncovered on the rugged shoreline of British Columbia by one of the Squamish Nation's foremost scholars, Professor Rudy Reimer. Reimer was searching for stone tools used by his ancestors when they first settled the area more than 10,000 years ago.
People picked up local rocks and modified them for plant gathering and hunting and a whole wide range of other activities.
But he kept finding stone tools in out-of-the-way places, and intriguingly, many appeared to have been in use in recent times.
When we did find them, they were in odd locations. They were in remote, hard-to-access areas. And to me, as a First Nations person, as an archaeologist, I began thinking about those sites in a different way.
Why were these tools being discovered in such out-of-the-way places? Rudy Reimer realized the sites he had been excavating were on land the Squamish had always held sacred, but left untouched. These remote places were reserved for what traditions called the wild people, the Smali.
I went into certain areas of our territory. The elders would ask me, so, well, why are you going there? That's where the wild people live.
But Reimer realized even the elders did not know all of the tribe's secrets. For millennia, Squamish shamans, the tribe's priests, had undergone a form of initiation known only among themselves. They would disappear into the wild, remote places to learn the secrets of nature. Could there be a connection between the shamans and the Smali? Finding stone tools at the same remote sites seemed to prove it.
While they were out there, it would be very common for those individuals to use stone implements. And as a result, we find remnants in very remote locations where people would have gone to do those spiritual training, those physical training activities.
But how could shamans be mistaken for Sasquatch? The young men who undertook shamanic training were expected to live in complete isolation from the rest of the world. They were forbidden from coming into contact with people. Cut off, even from their own tribe, their training could take years. In the process, gradually transforming them into unrecognizable wild men.
After a few years, they would have appeared very differently than someone living back at their home village, interacting with plants, animals, being on their own for extended periods of time. They would have become very physically fit. Their hair would have become very long and unkept, but they also be behaving differently. They may be mistaken for what we call an ape or a strange creature dwelling out in the wilderness.
Some traditions even speak of these wild young men covering their bodies in thick horsehair moss to keep warm.
If someone was wearing a coat of black light, of course they'd look like a hairy man. Yeah. But at the same time, are they doing that because they want to look like a Sasquatch as part of their ritual?
Yeah. It's easy to see how the legend of hairy wild men was born.
My perspective offers a cultural explanation for what we call Sasquatch, or what we in the Squamish Nation call Smiley, the wild people.
Explaining Sasquatch as a case of mistaken identity would only be possible if shamanic training was still happening in the forests of British Columbia today. Incredibly, this seems to be the case.
It carries on into modern day, and those people who are re-engaging with the landscape in those various forms of training, they bring back important messages of the landscape.
And it's not just the Squamish people. Tribes all over the Pacific Northwest have similar age-old traditions of wild man training. Can more than 400 local eyewitnesses over more than 100 years actually have been staring into the eyes of Squamish shamans? And could similar shamanic initiations explain sightings elsewhere?
And the question might arise, can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
Could this really be an answer to the question of Bigfoot?
There would have to be a whole lot of tribes participating in this back-to-nature wild man concept in order for that to be a reality. I don't see how the essence of what Bigfoot is to so many cultures across North America could possibly be represented with such a simple explanation.
It's time for the team to weigh the evidence and reveal their findings. The team investigating the worldwide mystery of Bigfoot is coming to its conclusions. They've narrowed down their inquiry to 3 potential suspects for what the creature, if it exists, could be. Now they consider this 3rd and latest suspect, Native American shamans training in the wild.
Can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
It wouldn't account for the 16-inch footprints, though, would it?
Ian Redmond has spotted a major flaw in the shaman theory. The creature is named Bigfoot for good reason. No ordinary human could ever leave footprints like these. Studying the giant-sized footprints allegedly left by Sasquatch is Jeff Meldrum's specialty. He's studied hundreds of them and found the distribution of sizes follows a pattern identical to a real animal species.
This is exactly the type of data we would expect if we were, in fact, sampling a real population.
But the existence of hoaxers makes any definitive conclusion drawn from footprints alone uncertain. What we really need is a live specimen. Or the next best thing, it's bones.
As soon as you have a skull, everyone is happy. You've got all the information you need, particularly things like teeth, because, you know, they're so different between different mammal species. If you had, there'd be no argument. It would be kind of a done deal.
There is no fossil evidence either, but some of the experts are not surprised.
We know virtually nothing about gorilla fossil history because they live in forests. And in forests, fossils don't form very well. There's this scrabble for nutrients. An animal dies, it decomposes, and all the nutrients go back into the trees or other animals, and you don't get fossils.
But if Sasquatch is a giant ape, there is other evidence the scientists might expect to find.
If they're eating all this vegetable matter, they're producing a lot of dung. Perhaps they bury it. Perhaps their tradition is to scoop a hole, defecate in it, and cover it. And that's why we never find dung around the forest where they live.
All the scientists have are tantalizing clues. Hair samples that don't register as any known species. Recorded calls in the night. And most crucial of all, thousands of eyewitness reports from all over the world. Using their global map, the team has advanced the search for Bigfoot in unexpected new directions. By analyzing clusters of sightings, they have revealed fascinating new insights into its likely habitat, behavior, and ancestry. Most important of all, they have shown how the Roger Patterson film of 1967 set off an unprecedented wave of sightings that continues to this day. But by closely examining the changing patterns of data before and after Patterson's film, the team has turned the clock back and filtered out many of the distortions the footage has caused. This helped them rule out either hoaxes or cases of mistaken identity, like Florida's skunk ape, which the team believes is probably one or more escaped chimps or other species of ape. On the other side of the world, in the forest of Sumatra, the team found the opposite, a history of sightings that cannot be explained by mistaken identity. What the 3-foot-high orang pendek is, no one yet knows. But most of the team thinks it's a genuine case of an unknown creature.
I think of all of them, that's got a very strong possibility to be discovered.
Elsewhere in Asia, by analyzing sightings of Yeti, Yeren, and the Mande Burung, the team found they were all reported within a few hundred miles of each other. The discovery of fossils of a giant ape called Gigantopithecus, found in the same part of Asia, pointed to what might be their common ancestor. But they also examined striking fossil evidence of another potential Bigfoot suspect, the Neanderthal-like Almasty. If such creatures exist, they must have crossed into North America from Asia along the now vanished land bridge called Beringia. The final question our experts must confront is, did they? Bill Sellers thinks not.
This is an absolute case there that we've not got the cut and dried evidence. We've got no skull, we've got no bones, and eventually we have to admit that we should have that.
But Jeff Meldrum is optimistic. Like the recently discovered X-woman, just one bone could change science's view of Bigfoot overnight.
A single tooth could make all the difference. Suddenly, I think there would be much more interest in the Sasquatch question from the mainstream scientific community.
Jack Rink remains open-minded about the existence of giant unknown apes in the world.
I'm not completely convinced that we are dealing with a mistaken identity phenomenon. I think there's a considerable amount of evidence that there may be, in fact, some primates out there.
Anna Nakaris and Ian Redmond believe the sightings are strong enough to warrant further detailed investigation.
It's extraordinary. Why aren't we putting more people on the ground to live in remote areas with all the appropriate equipment to record sounds and capture on camera traps these creatures?
But what creature do they hope to find?
Well, certainly there is a lot of difference of opinion as to what the nature of the Sasquatch is. There are those, such as myself, that hypothesize that it's much nearer an ape in its nature. But there are also others who maintain this is a type of person. If that is the case, then we really have to sort of redefine what the label human encompasses.
Whatever Bigfoot is, remains a mystery we may never solve. Like many extinct species, it may already have vanished into history without leaving any physical trace. But if it still survives, it surely hides in the last remote and unexplored places of our planet, constantly keeping just one step ahead of us.